What if the conflict between Israel and Iran isn't just about politics or war, but something deeper, a spiritual struggle that began long ago? How does this ancient battle, foretold in Scripture, shape the world we live in today, and what does it mean for your faith? In this video, we'll explore the profound biblical roots of the Israel-Iran conflict, tracing its origins to Abraham's two sons, Isaac and Ishmael. What began as a family divide over a divine promise has evolved into a battle with global implications, one that touches your spiritual life. We'll examine key historical events, from the establishment of Israel to the rise of Iran as a power in the Middle East. More importantly, we'll uncover how these events tie into biblical prophecies from Ezekiel, Daniel, and Revelation. This is a journey of understanding how God's eternal plan is unfolding in our time. 1. The biblical origin of the Israel-Iran conflict. The conflict between Israel and Iran goes far beyond modern geopolitics. Its roots trace back to the biblical story of Abraham and his two sons, Isaac and Ishmael. These two brothers, born of different mothers and under different circumstances, represent two distinct paths that would shape the future of nations. The tension between Israel and Iran began long before the modern era, originating with God's promises to Abraham. Isaac, the son of Abraham and Sarah, received God's covenant in Genesis 17:20-21. This covenant established Isaac as the father of the nation that would carry God's promises, forming the lineage of Israel. On the other hand, Ishmael, the son of Abraham and Hagar, was blessed, but was not the recipient of God's covenant. While Ishmael's descendants were promised blessings, they did not carry the divine promise that was given to Isaac's line. This spiritual divide laid the foundation for the tensions that persist today. The descendants of Isaac, the Israelites, and the descendants of Ishmael, the Arab nations, followed different spiritual paths over centuries. This divide was further amplified by the rise of Islam, which traces its roots back to Ishmael and continues to claim a spiritual connection to Abraham's covenant. The establishment of Israel as a state in 1948, the aftermath of the Holocaust, and the rise of Iran as a Muslim theocracy have revived this ancient tension. Iran, through its leadership and support for groups like Hezbollah and Hamas, views Israel not only as a political enemy, but as a spiritual rival, seeking to reclaim the promises that Islam believes were meant for Ishmael's descendants. Today, this conflict is not just about land or politics, but reflects a deeper spiritual battle. The worldviews of these two nations are shaped by centuries of divergent spiritual paths, one grounded in the covenant given to Isaac, and the other in the beliefs and promises of Islam. This division, rooted in the time of Abraham, continues to fuel the Israel-Iran conflict, and it remains as relevant in the modern world as it was in biblical times. 2. The rise of Islam and the legacy of Ishmael. The rise of Islam in the 7th century is one of the most significant turning points in the ongoing conflict between Israel and Iran. Islam, founded by the Prophet Muhammad, emerged as a powerful force in the Middle East and quickly spread across vast territories. It claimed a direct spiritual connection to the Abrahamic faith, positioning itself as the true heir of the promises God made to Abraham. However, this assertion has deep theological implications that are central to understanding the ongoing struggle between the descendants of Isaac and Ishmael. The Quran, Islam's holy book, traces its lineage to Abraham through his son Ishmael, and it claims that Ishmael, not Isaac, was the son of promise. In Islamic tradition, Muhammad is seen as a descendant of Ishmael, which solidifies the belief that Islam is the continuation of the true Abrahamic covenant. This stands in stark contrast to the Jewish and Christian understanding, where the covenant was established through Isaac, not Ishmael. In Galatians chapter 4:22-31, the Apostle Paul draws a parallel between Isaac and Ishmael, describing them as representations of two covenants: the Old Covenant of the law, represented by Ishmael, and the New Covenant of grace, represented by Isaac. This passage serves as a theological explanation of why the Jewish and Christian faiths, which trace their roots to Isaac, view themselves as the rightful heirs to Abraham's promise, while Islam, emerging centuries later, views itself as the true fulfillment of that promise through Ishmael. The theological dispute over which son holds the spiritual inheritance of Abraham has fueled centuries of conflict. The rise of Islam brought with it not only a new religion, but also a new worldview that positioned Ishmael as the central figure in the Abrahamic covenant. This claim provided the foundation for the Muslim belief that they are the rightful heirs to God's promises, a belief that would come into direct conflict with the Jews and Christians who maintained that the promise was made through Isaac. From the 7th century onward, this conflict was not just about religious differences, but about identity and legitimacy. For Muslims, the rise of Islam was not merely the establishment of a new religion, but the reclaiming of what they believed was rightfully theirs, the inheritance of Abraham's covenant. This ideological claim created a religious and spiritual rivalry with the Jewish people, whose identity and covenant were rooted in the promises made to Isaac. The theological significance of this divide is not merely academic, it has real-world consequences. The modern conflict between Israel and Iran can be traced to this very spiritual divide. Iran, as the leader of the Shiite Muslim world, has long viewed Israel not just as a political adversary, but as a theological enemy. Iran's leadership, rooted in the belief of Ishmael's primacy, sees the existence of Israel as a direct affront to Islam's claim as the true heir of Abraham's promise. This belief has shaped Iran's policies and actions toward Israel. Since the 1979 Islamic Revolution, Iran has pursued a policy of denying Israel's right to exist, considering the Jewish state a usurper of the divine promises. Iran's leaders have called for the destruction of Israel, and they have supported groups like Hezbollah and Hamas that share the goal of eliminating the Jewish state. The rise of Islam and the theological conflict over the Abrahamic promise is not just a historical event, it is a spiritual struggle that continues to affect the Middle East and the world. The dispute between Isaac and Ishmael, which began in the ancient past, is still playing out on the world stage today. The religious and spiritual identities formed by these two lineages continue to drive the geopolitical and military actions of nations, with Iran and Israel at the forefront of this ongoing battle. For Catholics and Christians, understanding this theological divide helps us make sense of the modern conflict. It is not just a struggle for territory or political power. It is a battle for spiritual legitimacy and the fulfillment of God's promises. The story of Isaac and Ishmael reminds us that the stakes in this conflict are far higher than we might initially realize. It is a reminder of the profound spiritual forces at play and the deep significance of the promises God made to Abraham. Promises that continue to shape the course of history today. As we watch the events unfold between Israel and Iran, we are called to reflect on how we, as Catholics, understand our place in God's divine plan. The tension between these two nations serves as a reminder of the importance of standing firm in our faith and trusting in the promises of God, knowing that His plan for salvation is unfolding even in the midst of conflict. 3. The establishment of the State of Israel. The establishment of the modern State of Israel in 1948 was not just a geopolitical event. It was, for many, the fulfillment of ancient biblical prophecies. For Jews around the world, it marked the return to their ancestral homeland after nearly 2,000 years of exile, persecution, and suffering, including the horrors of the Holocaust. It was seen as a miraculous restoration, a sign that God's promises to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were still active and being fulfilled in their lifetime. The Bible, particularly in the book of Amos, speaks of a time when God would plant Israel back in its own land, never again to be uprooted. In Amos 9:15 it is written, "I will plant Israel in their own land, never again to be uprooted from the land I have given them." This verse, along with others like it in Isaiah 66:8 and Jeremiah 31:10, provided a scriptural foundation for the Jewish people's belief that the return to Israel was part of God's divine plan. From a Catholic perspective, this event holds profound significance. For centuries, Christians, especially during the medieval and early modern periods, looked to Israel as the key to understanding God's ongoing work in the world. In Romans 11:26, the Apostle Paul declares, "And so all Israel will be saved." This verse has been interpreted to mean that Israel plays a central role in the fulfillment of God's plan for salvation, even as the church, made up of Gentiles, plays a crucial role in sharing the gospel with the world. The return of the Jewish people to their land is viewed as part of this ongoing divine drama. For Catholics, the establishment of Israel also serves as a reminder of God's faithfulness to his promises. When we look at the modern state of Israel, we see not just a political entity, but a nation that represents the continuation of God's covenant with the Jewish people. This covenant, begun with Abraham and confirmed through Isaac, remains unbroken, and Israel's return to its land serves as a sign of God's continued faithfulness. However, the founding of Israel was not without controversy. The 1948 Arab-Israeli War, which followed the declaration of Israel's independence, revealed the deep tensions between the new state and its Arab neighbors. For many Arab nations, the establishment of Israel represented a profound injustice, a deep wound in the fabric of the Middle East. This perception, particularly in countries like Iran, which historically had close ties with the Arab world, deepened the divide between Israel and the broader Muslim world. For Iran, which had been historically aligned with the West and secular in its governance under the Shah, the creation of Israel was seen as a direct challenge to its political and spiritual ideals. Following the 1979 Islamic Revolution, the new Shiite theocratic regime under Ayatollah Khomeini adopted an uncompromising stance toward Israel, viewing the Jewish state not just as a political rival, but as a theological adversary. This historical moment is essential in understanding the modern conflict. For Israel, the Declaration of Independence was seen as a miraculous restoration of a divine promise. Yet, for many Arab nations, particularly in the wake of the Islamic Revolution in Iran, it represented a betrayal, fueling decades of hostility and opposition. From a spiritual perspective, the founding of Israel raises important questions about the fulfillment of biblical prophecy and the nature of God's promises. As Catholics, we are called to see beyond the surface of geopolitical events and recognize that these events are part of God's broader redemptive plan. Israel's return to its land is a tangible reminder that God's promises are alive and unfolding before us. In our own lives, the establishment of Israel challenges us to trust in God's faithfulness, even in the midst of difficulties and uncertainties. Just as Israel was restored after centuries of exile, we too are called to trust in God's promises and remain faithful to his calling. It's a reminder that though we may face struggles and challenges, God is faithful to fulfill his word. The story of Israel's return is a call to renew our trust in God, knowing that his promises will come to pass in his perfect timing. 4. The 1979 Islamic Revolution in Iran and its impact. The 1979 Islamic Revolution in Iran marked a turning point in the Middle East and had profound implications for the relationship between Israel and Iran. Prior to the revolution, Iran, under the rule of Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, maintained relatively cordial relations with Israel. Iran was a strategic partner of the West, and its relationship with Israel was primarily based on mutual interests in security, trade, and intelligence sharing. However, the revolution radically transformed the political landscape, changing not only Iran's domestic structure, but also its foreign policy stance. Under the leadership of Ayatollah Khomeini, Iran underwent a dramatic shift from a monarchy to a Shiite theocracy governed by Islamic law. The Shah was overthrown, and in his place, Khomeini established the Islamic Republic of Iran. This new regime viewed Israel not just as a political adversary, but as a theological enemy. In the eyes of the revolutionary leaders, Israel represented a challenge to Islam's dominance in the region, and the existence of the Jewish state was seen as an affront to their beliefs. Iran's hostility toward Israel grew exponentially after the revolution, fueled by both political and theological motives. Khomeini's rhetoric consistently framed Israel as the little Satan, with the United States being labeled the Great Satan. This ideological shift placed Iran at the forefront of a broader regional opposition to Israel and led to the establishment of various paramilitary groups, such as Hezbollah in Lebanon and Hamas in the Gaza Strip, all of which received financial and logistical support from Tehran. The primary goal of these groups, heavily influenced by Iran's leadership, became to destabilize Israel and challenge its legitimacy in the region. From a spiritual perspective, this shift in Iran's stance can be understood in light of the theological rivalry between the descendants of Isaac and Ishmael. As descendants of Ishmael, the Iranian leadership viewed their role as reclaiming the promise made to Abraham, a promise they believed was rightfully theirs through the lineage of Ishmael. The rise of Islam and the Islamic Revolution gave a spiritual force to this claim, solidifying Iran's position as the champion of Islamic resistance against Israel. For Catholics, this development serves as a reminder of the continuing spiritual battle between light and darkness, truth and deception. Theological conflict is not just a matter of national borders or political power. It is rooted in the deep spiritual divide that stretches back to the time of Abraham and continues to shape the world today. The actions of Iran, in its refusal to recognize Israel's right to exist, are a modern echo of this age-old rivalry. Yet, as Christians, we are reminded to view these events with discernment and to pray for peace and understanding, knowing that God is sovereign over all nations. The rise of Iran as a theocratic power has also contributed to the broader instability in the Middle East. Iran's support for various militant groups has not only fueled conflict between Israel and its Arab neighbors, but has also had a destabilizing effect on other regions, including Syria, Lebanon, and even Yemen. Iran's growing influence has positioned it as a major player in the regional power struggle, and its role as an antagonist to Israel has made it a central figure in biblical prophecy. As Catholics, we are called to reflect on the spiritual implications of this conflict. The actions of nations and their leaders often reflect deeper spiritual battles that transcend politics. The Bible reminds us in Ephesians 6:12 that our struggle is not merely against flesh and blood, but against the spiritual forces of evil. The conflict between Israel and Iran is a vivid example of this spiritual warfare. We must recognize that while we can support efforts for peace, our ultimate hope lies in God's eternal plan for redemption. For Catholics, the story of Iran's rise as a theocratic state is a call to remain vigilant in our faith. We must recognize the spiritual forces at work and respond with prayer, humility, and a renewed commitment to living out our faith in Christ. Even as the world's political landscape shifts, we are called to remain steadfast, knowing that God is ultimately in control. Just as God guided Israel through centuries of exile, persecution, and conflict, He will continue to guide His people through the trials of the present age, leading us toward the fulfillment of His promises. 5. Iran's role as a spiritual and political power. Since the 1979 Islamic Revolution, Iran has solidified its role as a key player in both spiritual and political spheres in the Middle East. Its leadership, guided by Shiite theocracy, views its actions against Israel not just as a political struggle, but as a fulfillment of what they perceive as a divine mission. This perspective is rooted in Iran's self-image as the guardian of Islamic values, which are seen as superior to the state of Israel's existence. Iran's spiritual motivations, intertwined with its political and military actions, have shaped its foreign policy, especially in regard to Israel. Biblically, Iran's growing influence in the region aligns with prophecies about Persia's role in the end times, particularly in Ezekiel 38 and 39, where Persia, modern-day Iran, is described as part of a coalition that will gather against Israel in the final days. This prophetic vision paints a picture of a powerful alliance that stands in opposition to God's chosen people, reflecting the ongoing struggle between good and evil. The strategic support Iran has provided to groups like Hezbollah in Lebanon and Hamas in the Gaza Strip demonstrates its commitment to destabilizing Israel. By funding and arming these groups, Iran seeks to weaken Israel from within, using proxy forces to carry out its agenda. Iran's involvement is not just military, it is also ideological and spiritual. By supporting radical factions, Iran attempts to spread a vision of resistance to Israel's existence while promoting its own interpretation of Islamic governance. This creates an environment of perpetual tension in the Middle East, where religious extremism plays a central role in the shaping of political alliances. For Catholics, this development serves as a powerful reminder of the need for discernment in understanding the spiritual forces at work behind the scenes. While we are urged to pray for peace and the welfare of all nations, we must also recognize the importance of standing firm in the faith, understanding that political and spiritual forces often work in tandem to fulfill God's ultimate plan. We are reminded that Ephesians 6:12 calls us to battle not against flesh and blood, but against the spiritual forces of evil. As the battle lines continue to be drawn between Israel and its enemies, it is essential for Christians to remain grounded in their faith, with the knowledge that God's sovereignty rules over all affairs of the world. Iran's role as a spiritual and political power highlights the intersection of religion and geopolitics. It is a reminder that nations and individuals often act out of deeper spiritual convictions, sometimes without recognizing the full weight of their actions in the broader scope of God's plan. While Iran views its struggle with Israel through the lens of Islamic prophecy, Christians are called to view the same situation through the lens of biblical prophecy, recognizing that God's promises to Israel are enduring and that ultimately His justice will prevail. In this global context, we are reminded that God's kingdom transcends earthly borders and kingdoms. While political divisions and religious differences may persist, God's promises to His people remain steadfast. As Catholics, we are called to trust in God's plan, knowing that the struggles we face in the world today are part of a much greater story. The conflict in the Middle East is a reminder of the ongoing spiritual warfare, but also of God's unwavering commitment to His people, the ultimate fulfillment of His promises, and the coming of His kingdom in all its fullness. 6. The spiritual battle behind the Israel-Iran conflict. At the heart of the Israel-Iran conflict lies a profound spiritual battle that transcends geopolitical interests. This is not merely a war between two nations. It is a clash of ideologies, of faiths, and of divine promises. As Christians, we must recognize that the conflict is not only a struggle for land or power, but a confrontation between the forces of light and darkness, truth and falsehood. In Ephesians chapters 6:12, Paul reminds us that we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers over this present darkness. This verse is particularly relevant as we witness the ongoing spiritual and political struggle in the Middle East. On one side, we have Israel, a nation founded upon the covenantal promises of God. And on the other, we have Iran, which, through the rise of Islam, claims a divine right to challenge those promises. The spiritual battle is rooted in the ancient rivalry between Isaac and Ishmael. As descendants of Isaac, the Israelites are heirs to the promises made to Abraham, including the land of Israel and the coming of the Messiah. Meanwhile, the descendants of Ishmael, as represented by the nations surrounding Israel, including Iran, believe that they too are rightful heirs to Abraham's legacy. This spiritual divide is reflected not only in territorial disputes, but in deeply held theological beliefs about God's plan for the world. The rise of Islam and its view of Ishmael as the true heir of Abraham's covenant has created a long-standing theological challenge to the Jewish and Christian faiths. While Christians and Jews view the covenant as being fulfilled through Isaac and the coming of Christ, many Muslims believe that the true inheritance of Abraham's promises lies with Ishmael and his descendants. This theological divide forms the bedrock of the Israel-Iran conflict, where religious convictions shape not only political actions, but also the motivations behind the actions of nations. Iran's role in this spiritual battle is particularly significant. The Islamic Republic of Iran views itself as a leader in the struggle to uphold Islamic principles, often positioning itself as the defender of Islam against the West and more specifically against Israel. Iran's leadership has consistently rejected Israel's right to exist and supports groups like Hezbollah and Hamas that seek to undermine Israel's sovereignty. These actions are driven by a belief in the superiority of Islam, which according to Iran's interpretation supersedes the covenant made with Israel. For Catholics, it's essential to recognize that this is not just a political or military battle, it is a spiritual one. The forces behind the conflict are deeply rooted in the worldviews of two religions with radically different interpretations of the covenant God made with Abraham. As Christians, we are called to respond not with hatred or violence, but with prayer, discernment, and a firm understanding of God's ultimate victory. While the geopolitical implications are significant, the real battle is taking place in the heavenly realms. In Revelation 12:7 we read, "Now war arose in heaven, Michael and his angels fighting against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought back." The same forces that oppose God's people in the spiritual realm are manifesting in the conflict between Israel and Iran. This war is a reflection of the eternal struggle between the forces of darkness and the kingdom of God. As Catholics, we are reminded to put on the full armor of God, as outlined in Ephesians 6:13-17, and to stand firm against the spiritual forces of evil. Our battle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers of this world's darkness. In the midst of political and military conflict, we are called to be light in the darkness, to pray for peace, and to trust in God's ultimate plan for His people. This spiritual battle requires vigilance. The conflict between Israel and Iran may seem like a distant geopolitical issue, but it is also a reminder that the forces of evil are at work in the world today. As Catholics, we must remain watchful, always ready to stand firm in our faith, knowing that God will ultimately triumph over the darkness. The tension in the Middle East is a call for each of us to engage in prayer, spiritual warfare, and to be actively involved in God's kingdom work, trusting in His promises and His sovereignty over all nations. 7. The prophetic implications of the Israel-Iran conflict. The ongoing Israel-Iran conflict has not only political and spiritual dimensions, but also profound prophetic implications. This conflict has been foretold in the Bible, particularly in the books of Ezekiel, Daniel, and Revelation. These ancient prophecies offer insight into the unfolding events of our time and serve as a powerful reminder of God's ultimate plan for the world. In Ezekiel 38:39, the prophet Ezekiel describes a future battle in which nations led by Gog from the land of Magog will come against Israel. Many biblical scholars interpret the land of Magog to refer to modern-day Russia, with other nations aligned against Israel, including Persia, which is now Iran. The prophecy states that these nations will unite in an attempt to destroy Israel, but ultimately they will be defeated by divine intervention. The imagery of this great battle is strikingly similar to the events unfolding today, where Iran, along with its proxies, seeks to undermine Israel's existence. In Revelation 16:16, we see a direct connection to the end times, with the gathering of nations to the valley of Armageddon for the final battle. The significance of this prophecy is that it points to a time when the nations of the world will converge on Israel in a final attempt to destroy God's chosen people. What we are witnessing today, tensions between Israel and Iran, the formation of alliances against Israel, and the rhetoric of annihilation from Iran, seems to align with these biblical prophecies. It is not merely a political struggle, it is part of the grand narrative of the end times. This prophetic understanding calls us to a sense of urgency and preparation. As Catholics, we are encouraged to live in readiness for Christ's return, as the Scriptures warn that the end of the world will come like a thief in the night. 1 Thessalonians 5:2. The unfolding conflict between Israel and Iran serves as a reminder that the times are drawing near. The global unrest, the rise of alliances against Israel, and the ongoing struggles in the Middle East should awaken us to the truth that God's prophetic plan is still unfolding. In Daniel 9:27, we read about a future covenant that will be broken halfway through, triggering a period of unprecedented destruction and chaos. Many theologians believe this prophecy is related to the peace agreements Israel may sign with its enemies, which will eventually be broken, leading to the beginning of the tribulation. Iran, with its resistance to Israel's legitimacy, is a key player in this prophecy, as it aligns itself with nations hostile to Israel's existence. The conflict between Israel and Iran is thus a precursor to the fulfillment of prophecies leading up to the Great Tribulation and the return of Christ. As Catholics, we are reminded that while these prophetic events may cause fear and uncertainty, we must stand firm in our faith. God has already promised that He will be victorious, and through Christ's return, He will establish His kingdom forever. The culmination of these prophetic events is not destruction, but redemption. God's sovereignty will be fully revealed, and those who are faithful will be rewarded with eternal life. In Revelation 19:11-16, we see a vivid depiction of Christ's return to defeat the forces of evil and establish His reign. This final victory of Christ over the forces of darkness is the hope that we, as Catholics, hold on to. The conflict we see in the Middle East is part of a much larger cosmic battle between light and darkness. But the good news is that Christ has already overcome, and His return will bring peace and restoration. The prophetic implications of the Israel-Iran conflict remind us of the urgency of living in accordance with God's Word. While we cannot predict the exact timeline of these events, we can be sure that God's plan will come to fruition. As the tension in the Middle East escalates, let us remain vigilant in prayer, watchful for the signs of Christ's return, and faithful in our commitment to living out God's kingdom on earth. This prophetic journey is a call to action for each of us to examine our hearts, strengthen our faith, and live in anticipation of the glorious return of Jesus Christ. Let the unfolding events in the Middle East be a reminder that we are living in the final days before God's kingdom is fully realized. May we be ready when the time comes, faithful to the call, and prepared to witness the victory of the Lamb. Conclusion: the final victory and our call to faith. The ongoing conflict between Israel and Iran is not just a geopolitical struggle, but a spiritual battle that has its roots in ancient prophecy. From the time of Abraham and his sons, Isaac and Ishmael, this division has continued to shape the history and fate of nations. The conflict we see today is part of a much larger narrative, one that spans millennia and points toward the ultimate fulfillment of God's promises in the end times. Biblical prophecies, particularly those in Ezekiel, Daniel, and Revelation, remind us that the struggles in the Middle East are not merely about land, politics, or military might. They are part of a cosmic battle between light and darkness, truth and falsehood. While the world may view these events through the lens of international diplomacy or military strategy, we, as Catholics, are called to see them through the eyes of faith, understanding that God is sovereign over all things. In times of global uncertainty and rising tensions, we must remember that the ultimate victory belongs to Christ. As we witness these prophetic events unfold, we are called to live with faith, vigilance, and hope. God's plan is unfolding before our eyes, and while we may face challenges, we can rest assured that God will ultimately triumph. Now is the time to prepare our hearts for what is to come. As we see the prophecies of the end times begin to take shape, we must strengthen our relationship with God, live according to His Word, and remain faithful to the calling He has placed on our lives. The conflict between Israel and Iran serves as a reminder that our true citizenship is not of this world, but in heaven, and we are called to keep our eyes fixed on Christ, the author and finisher of our faith. If this video has opened your eyes to the deeper spiritual meaning behind the Israel-Iran conflict, share it with others who need to hear this message. Together, let's reflect on the prophecies that are unfolding before us and how they call us to live more fully for God's purposes. Like, comment, and subscribe for more insights on biblical prophecy and its relevance to our lives today. As we witness these ancient prophecies coming to life today, how do you see God's hand in the events unfolding in the Middle East? What lessons can we as Catholics learn from these prophecies to strengthen our faith and prepare for the future? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let's continue the conversation.